She'd spent her whole life believing the world had already taken everything from her. A girl raised in the cracks of the foster system, surviving on minimum wage shifts and the quiet hope of simply staying afloat. But everything changed the moment she opened a cream-colored envelope that should never have found its way into her hands. Inside was a name she didn't know, a grandmother she never met, and a fortune so immense it felt like fiction. One condition: she had to live alone in the estate for a month. What began as a miracle quickly twisted into something far darker because someone else wanted that inheritance, someone who had been waiting in the shadows. And the moment the front door creaked open, she realized the real test had just begun. For a young woman whose world was defined by the scent of cheap laundry detergent and the constant hum of a struggling radiator, the arrival of the letter felt like a tear in the fabric of reality. Her life was a carefully constructed fortress built on the rubble of a childhood in the foster care system. It was a small life, a threadbare existence, but it was orderly, predictable, and hers. She worked a thankless job at a downtown diner where the smell of grease clung to her clothes long after her shift ended. Her tiny apartment, with its mismatched furniture and second-hand books, was her sanctuary, a testament to a life spent making do with very little, but making it on her own terms. She was a survivor, accustomed to disappointment, but beneath the calloused exterior lay a cautious hopefulness, a quiet dream of a stable life, a place to truly belong. That dream, however, felt galaxies away on this particular Tuesday afternoon. Tucked between a utility bill and a coupon mailer was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was heavy, made of paper she'd only ever seen in movies, and bore the embossed seal of a prestigious law firm she'd never heard of. Her first thought was that it was a mistake. Her second was that it was a scam. People like her didn't receive letters like this. She turned it over in her hands, her heart beginning a nervous, unfamiliar rhythm against her ribs. With a deep breath, she slid her finger under the seal and broke it. The words on the page seemed to swim before her eyes. Foreign and nonsensical. It is with our deepest condolences that we inform you of the passing of your grandmother. Grandmother. She had no grandmother. She had no one. She read on, her hands beginning to tremble. The letter named her, by her full name, as the sole heir to an estate. The words that followed were even more unbelievable. A vast fortune, a portfolio of valuable assets, and a secluded countryside estate worth millions of dollars. The world tilted on its axis. The hum of the radiator faded into a dull roar in her ears. This had to be a cruel, elaborate joke. A lifetime of letdowns had taught her to view any glimmer of good fortune with profound suspicion. This wasn't a glimmer, it was a blinding sun, and she was certain it was about to burn her. A few days later, she found herself sitting in an office that seemed to be from another century. The chair was plush leather. The desk was a vast expanse of polished mahogany, and the air smelled of old books and expensive coffee. Across from her sat the lawyer, an elderly man with a kind face and eyes that held the weary weight of 1,000 stories. He confirmed everything. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a scam. Her grandmother, a woman she never knew existed, had amassed an incredible amount of wealth over her lifetime and had left it all to her. The entire inheritance was hers. He spoke of investments, of stocks and bonds, of a capital sum so large she couldn't even picture it. He slid a folder across the desk filled with documents, detailing a patrimony that could change not just her life, but the lives of generations to come. Then, he reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, velvet box. "Your grandmother wanted you to have this immediately," he said, his voice gentle. He opened it to reveal an antique silver locket, tarnished with age but intricately carved with delicate vines. It was beautiful and felt impossibly personal. She took it, the cool metal, a stark contrast to her warm, clammy palm. It was the first real connection to this ghost of a grandmother, the first piece of evidence that this wasn't all a dream. For a moment, a fragile sense of hope bloomed in her chest. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the belonging she had always craved. But then came the catch. "Nadali, there is one condition to claiming the full inheritance," the lawyer continued, his kind eyes now tinged with something she couldn't quite decipher. Pity, perhaps, or a warning. "According to the will, you must live on the estate, alone, for 1 full month." The hope in her chest withered. A month. It sounded simple, yet the way he said it made it feel like a sentence. The sprawling, beautiful house depicted in the photographs suddenly seemed less like a palace and more like a gilded cage. Why would her grandmother impose such a strange condition? It felt less like a legal formality and more like the beginning of a test. As she stood to leave, the locket clutched tightly in her hand, the lawyer offered one last piece of advice, his voice low and solemn. "Be careful," he warned. "Wealth has a way of revealing character, both in oneself and in others." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning, planting the first terrifying seed of unease in her heart. The drive to the countryside was a blur of green and gold, a landscape so different from the concrete canyons of her city life that it felt like entering another world. The taxi turned off the main road and onto a long, private lane, shaded by ancient oak trees that formed a canopy overhead. And then the house appeared. It wasn't just a house. It was a mansion, a sprawling stone structure with ivy climbing its walls and dozens of windows that stared out like dark, vacant eyes. It was both beautiful and intimidating, a monument to a kind of wealth she couldn't comprehend, a level of capital that seemed to belong to history books, not to her. The lawyer's words echoed in her mind as she paid the driver and stood alone on the gravel driveway, her single worn suitcase looking comically small before the massive oak doors. This was her inheritance. This was her test. Stepping inside, the silence was the first thing that struck her. It was a deep, profound quiet, broken only by the sound of her own breathing and the creak of the floorboards beneath her feet. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, decaying paper from 1,000 books, and the faint, ghostly perfume of dried roses. Sunlight streamed through a tall, arched window in the grand foyer, illuminating swirling motes of dust in its golden shafts. It was the complete opposite of her noisy apartment, where the sounds of traffic and neighbors were a constant, chaotic lullaby. Here, the silence was so absolute, it felt like a presence, amplifying her own sense of being an intruder in a world where she didn't belong. She was a girl who counted her dollars carefully to make rent. Suddenly, the owner of assets she couldn't begin to tally. The first few days passed in a dreamlike haze. She wandered from room to room, her footsteps echoing in the vast, empty halls. She ran her fingers over dusty velvet chairs, gazed at portraits of stern-faced ancestors who were apparently hers, and tried to reconcile the life she had known with this opulent reality. Every room was a time capsule, filled with furniture that was worth more than everything she had ever owned. She felt like a ghost, haunting the edges of a life that wasn't hers, a life built on a fortune she had done nothing to earn. In the library, surrounded by leather-bound books, she wondered about the woman who had lived here. What kind of businesses had she run? What shrewd investments in the stock market had allowed her to amass such a staggering patrimony? The sheer weight of it all was suffocating, and the feeling of being an imposter was a constant, gnawing companion. Just as she was beginning to drown in the loneliness, a flicker of hope ignited. On the third day, she discovered a small conservatory at the back of the house, its glass panes grimy, but its shelves still lined with withered, skeletal plants. She pushed open the stiff door and stepped inside. The room was warm from the afternoon sun, and through the dirty glass, she could see a neglected garden overgrown with weeds and wildflowers. In that moment, something shifted. She imagined cleaning the glass, tending to the garden, bringing this one small corner of the immense estate back to life. For the first time, she allowed herself to picture a future here, a quiet, stable existence. Maybe this wasn't a cage. Maybe, just maybe, it could be a home. That fragile hope was shattered by the crunch of tires on gravel. The sound was alien in the profound silence, and it sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through her. Her first instinct was to hide. The lawyer's warning about wealth revealing character flashed in her mind. Who would be coming here? She crept to a front window, her heart hammering against her ribs, and peered through the dusty lace curtains. An expensive-looking black sedan had pulled up to the front steps, gleaming in the sun. The driver's door opened, and a woman emerged. She was the picture of elegance, dressed in a crisp, white linen suit, her blonde hair styled perfectly. She moved with an air of effortless confidence, as if she owned the very ground she walked on. Before she could process what was happening, the woman was at the door, her knock echoing through the foyer. Hesitantly, she opened it just a crack. The woman's face broke into a dazzling, perfect smile. "There you are. I was so worried. I've been trying to reach you for days," she exclaimed, her voice warm and melodious. "You probably have no idea who I am. I'm Eleanor, your cousin." The word hung in the air between them. Cousin. A word that, for her, had only ever existed in books and movies. Eleanor didn't wait for an invitation. She gently pushed the door open wider. "I know this must be such a shock. We all were when we heard about Grandma. But finding you, after all these years, it's a miracle." Eleanor's words were a torrent of perfectly crafted sentiment. She spoke of a loving family that had never stopped searching, of a grandmother who had been tragically estranged from them, and of their overwhelming joy at finally discovering her existence. It was everything the lonely girl inside her had ever fantasized about. A family, people who belonged to her, people who had been looking for her. She painted a beautiful, heartbreaking picture of a loving clan, desperate to welcome their lost member back into the fold. The protagonist stood frozen, caught in a battle between a lifetime of ingrained mistrust and the overwhelming, desperate yearning to believe. This woman was a stranger, yet she spoke the language of her deepest, most secret desires. Every instinct screamed that it was a trap, that this was too good to be true. The lawyer's warning felt like a cold hand on her shoulder, but Eleanor's eyes were filled with what looked like genuine tears of joy, her smile unwavering. "I know it's a lot to take in," Eleanor said, her voice softening with practiced empathy. "That's why I'm here. You can't be expected to go through this alone. The house, the lawyers, the entire inheritance, it's overwhelming. Please, let me stay for a while. Let me help you adjust. We have so much catching up to do, as family." The final word was the key that unlocked the door to her cautious heart. Family. Against every rational instinct forged in the fires of a harsh childhood, she stepped back, pulling the heavy oak door open. For the first week, Eleanor was a dream. She filled the silent, cavernous house with laughter and stories, painting vivid pictures of the family the protagonist had always longed for. She spoke of holiday gatherings, of inside jokes, of a grandmother who was eccentric but deeply loving. She helped her navigate the kitchen, a room larger than her entire old apartment, and taught her the names of the stern-faced ancestors in the portraits. For the first time, the grand estate began to feel less like a museum and more like a home. The loneliness that had been a constant companion began to recede, replaced by a tentative, fragile joy. Eleanor spoke easily of the family's wealth, of the immense capital their grandmother had built through shrewd investments and a keen eye for business. She was a genius with money, Eleanor would say with a sigh of admiration. Managing this fortune, this entire portfolio of assets, is a huge responsibility. It's a good thing you have me here to help you. But as the second week began, the dream started to curdle at the edges. The change was subtle at first, almost unnoticeable. It began with a photograph. It was the only picture she had of her foster mother, a faded, dog-eared snapshot she kept on her bedside table. One morning, it was gone. She searched the room, her anxiety mounting with every empty drawer she checked. When she asked Eleanor about it, her cousin simply tilted her head with a look of pitying concern. "Oh, honey, are you sure you didn't misplace it? You've been under so much stress." Later that day, she found the photo in the kitchen trash bin, tucked beneath some coffee grounds. When she confronted Eleanor, her face a mask of hurt and confusion, her cousin just laughed it off. "You're seeing plots everywhere. It must have fallen in by accident. You're so sensitive about your past." The comments became more frequent, each one a tiny, poisoned dart disguised as a joke. When she struggled to understand a financial document, Eleanor would say, "Don't worry your pretty little head about it. People from your background aren't expected to understand things like dividend reports or the stock market." The remarks were always delivered with a dazzling smile, making her feel foolish for taking offense. Eleanor began to control her connection to the outside world, answering the landline before she could, and reporting that it was always a wrong number. Her cell phone, strangely, lost all service within the thick stone walls of the mansion. The isolation was slow and suffocating. The joy she had felt was replaced by a creeping dread, a feeling that the walls were closing in. The breaking point came late one night. Unable to sleep, she wandered into the library, the room where the lawyer had first laid out the details of her inheritance. She felt an inexplicable pull towards her grandmother's massive mahogany desk. She ran her fingers over the polished wood, searching for something, anything, that felt real. Her fingers brushed against a small, almost invisible latch on the side. It clicked open, revealing a shallow, hidden drawer. Inside was a single folder, identical to the one the lawyer had given her, but with a small, handwritten note on the tab. "Contingencies." Her heart pounded as she opened it. There, in cold, legal type, was a clause she had never seen before. It stated that if, at the end of the 1-month residency, a designated family council deemed her morally or mentally unfit to manage the estate, the entire inheritance, every dollar of the fortune, every share of stock, every ounce of gold in the portfolio would default to their control. And at the bottom of the page, listed as the sole member and head of this council, was one name: Eleanor. The air rushed from her lungs. It wasn't a gift, it was a trap. The month-long stay wasn't a test of her ability to adjust. It was an audition for her own sanity, and Eleanor was the judge, jury, and executioner. Every kind word, every shared laugh, every story had been a lie, a carefully constructed performance designed to break her down and prove her incompetent. The lawyer's warning came crashing back. Wealth has a way of revealing character. Eleanor's character was that of a predator, and she was the prey, trapped in a gilded cage. The house was no longer a potential home. It was a psychological battlefield. Her mind raced, replaying every strange incident, every backhanded compliment. It was a systematic campaign of cruelty. Eleanor was trying to drive her mad. Despair washed over her, cold and absolute. She felt her grip on reality, already tenuous, beginning to slip. In the suffocating silence of the library, she sank into the leather chair, her body trembling. Her hand instinctively went to her neck, closing around the antique silver locket her grandmother had left her. It was the only thing that felt true. With fumbling fingers, she pried it open, expecting to see a miniature portrait, but there was no picture inside. Instead, nestled in the tiny compartment, was a minuscule, tightly folded piece of aged paper. Her hands shaking, she carefully unfolded it. On it, written in elegant, looping script, were just a few words, a cryptic riddle that made no sense at all. But it was a voice from the past, a message from the woman who had started all of this. It was a thread of hope in the suffocating darkness. The paper was a fragile shield against the crushing weight of her reality, but it was a shield nonetheless. The riddle's words were nonsensical, a jumble of poetic phrases about a silent songbird and a treasure that isn't gold. But they were her grandmother's words. They were proof that the woman who had created this gilded prison was more than just a name on a legal document. She was a person who wrote in riddles. As she clutched the tiny script, Eleanor's voice, sickeningly sweet, drifted up the grand staircase. "Honey, are you all right up there? You've been so quiet." The protagonist quickly folded the paper, tucking it back into the locket and snapping it shut. The click was a small, defiant sound in the oppressive silence. She had a secret now, a weapon Eleanor knew nothing about. When she walked out of the library, Eleanor was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, a perfectly feigned look of concern on her face. "There you are. I was starting to worry you'd gotten lost in one of these dusty old rooms." The charm that had once seemed so comforting now felt like a spider's web, sticky and dangerous. The third week descended into a quiet, brutal war. Eleanor's campaign to fracture her sanity became bolder, more audacious. Objects began to migrate. The antique silver hairbrush from her grandmother's vanity would appear on the kitchen counter. A book she was reading would vanish from her nightstand and reappear on a high shelf in the library, a room she hadn't entered in days. Each time she pointed it out, Eleanor would respond with a theatrical sigh and a gentle touch on her arm. "Oh dear. Your memory seems to be playing tricks on you again. The stress of managing this new wealth must be getting to you. It happens." It was textbook gaslighting, a methodical erosion of her own perception. Eleanor would talk loudly on the phone to unseen family members, recounting fabricated stories of her strange behavior, her memory lapses, her emotional fragility, always ensuring she was just within earshot. The mansion, with its endless corridors and silent, watching portraits, became an echo chamber for her own self-doubt. The isolation was absolute. She was a prisoner, and her warden wore a cashmere sweater and a dazzling smile. Then, the next phase of the attack began. A man arrived one afternoon, introduced by Eleanor as a trusted family financial advisor. He was slick, with a smile that never reached his cold eyes and a suit that probably cost more than her entire life's earnings. He spoke in a rapid-fire torrent of financial jargon, throwing around terms like asset allocation, capital gains, stock market volatility, and cryptocurrency portfolios. He spread charts and graphs across the dining room table, detailing the immense scope of the inheritance, the sheer volume of dollars and euros tied up in complex investments and funds. "This kind of fortune doesn't manage itself," he said, his tone condescending. "It requires decisive, expert action to protect the patrimony from market fluctuations and maximize its rentability. We need to consolidate these assets immediately." He slid a thick stack of documents and a heavy, gold-plated pen across the table. "This just grants us temporary power of attorney. It's a standard formality to protect your wealth while you're adjusting." The pressure was immense. Eleanor stood behind her, a hand resting on her shoulder, a gesture that was meant to look supportive but felt like the grip of a captor. The advisor's voice droned on about dividends, euros, and protecting her net worth. Her head was spinning. She was just a girl who used to work at a diner, and they were talking about a capital sum that sounded like a nation's GDP. She was out of her depth, exhausted, and her resolve was crumbling. This was the checkmate. If she signed, she lost everything. If she refused, it was more proof of her incompetence, her inability to make sound financial decisions. Her hand trembled as she reached for the pen. And then a sound so unexpected it made all three of them jump. The shrill, piercing ring of the old landline telephone on the hall table. It hadn't rung once since she'd arrived. Eleanor shot a look of pure fury towards the phone before her mask of pleasant concern slipped back into place. "I'll get it." she snapped. But the protagonist was already moving, propelled by a desperate instinct. She snatched the receiver before Eleanor could reach it. "Hello," she whispered, her voice hoarse. For a moment, there was only static. Then, a familiar, calm voice came through the line. It was the elderly lawyer. "I trust you are well," he said, his tone even. "I'm just calling with a piece of friendly advice. Sign nothing, not a single page. Not until I've seen it myself." The line went dead. She slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle, the click echoing in the sudden tense silence of the foyer. The thread of hope from the locket had just become a lifeline. Eleanor's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of pure, unadulterated fury in her eyes, before the mask of pleasant concern was expertly snapped back into place. The financial advisor, a man clearly unaccustomed to deals falling apart, began packing his briefcase with brisk, irritated movements. His polished veneer had cracked, revealing the predatory impatience beneath. He didn't even bother with a farewell, simply nodding curtly at Eleanor and striding out of the mansion, the heavy oak door closing behind him with a definitive thud. The silence that fell was heavier, more dangerous than before. The pretense was gone. They were no longer family in waiting and a confused heiress. They were adversaries in a war for a colossal fortune. "That was a foolish mistake," Eleanor said, her voice dropping the syrupy sweetness and taking on a cold, sharp edge. "That man was trying to help you protect your assets. This entire patrimony could be lost through inaction." But her words had lost their power. The brief phone call had been a crack of light in a dark room, reminding her that the world existed beyond these suffocating walls. She was not entirely alone. Without a word, she turned and walked up the grand staircase, feeling Eleanor's icy stare on her back. For the first time, she wasn't retreating in fear. She was regrouping. The game had changed. She was no longer just a pawn to be manipulated. She was a player, and she needed to learn the rules. Back in her room, the adrenaline from the confrontation gave way to a surge of defiant energy. She was done being a victim, waiting for the next psychological blow to land. She had to understand the woman who had orchestrated this bizarre and cruel test. Who was this grandmother who wrote in riddles and built an empire of wealth, only to leave it hanging by the thread of a one-month trial? Feeling a desperate need for answers, she left her room and began to explore the house with a new purpose. She was no longer an intruder but an archaeologist, digging for the truth buried under layers of dust and deceit. She started in the library, the heart of the estate, and the place where the trap had been revealed. The sheer volume of books was overwhelming. Thousands of them lining the walls from floor to ceiling. Most were related to business and finance, tomes on the stock market, analyses of global trade, biographies of billionaire tycoons. It was the library of a woman who didn't just have money. She understood the intricate machinery of capital. As she ran her fingers along the spines, a thought occurred to her. Everything in this house was meticulously organized, yet her grandmother had hidden the truth in a secret drawer and a tiny locket. She was a woman of secrets. Her eyes scanned the shelves, looking for anything out of place. In a far corner, behind a heavy velvet armchair, was a section of books that seemed older than the rest. The leather was more cracked, the gold leaf titles more faded. They were classics, but they felt different, almost like a facade. A faint, cool draft seemed to emanate from the wall behind them. Her heart quickened. She pulled a heavy volume of Shakespeare from the shelf, and then another. Behind them, barely visible in the dim light, was the faint, vertical line of a hidden door, masterfully blended into the woodwork of the bookshelf. Her fingers searched the frame until they found a small, carved rosette that was not quite flush with the wood. She pressed it. With a soft click, the bookshelf swung inward, revealing a small, dark space beyond. The air that wafted out was stale, smelling of sealed-off time. Using the light from her phone, she stepped inside. It was a small, secret study, a stark contrast to the opulence of the rest of the mansion. The room was personal, intimate. A single, elegant desk faced a small window that was boarded up from the outside. On the desk, illuminated by the beam of her phone, was a neat stack of leather-bound journals. With a trembling hand, she reached out and opened the topmost one. The script was unmistakable. It was the same elegant, looping handwriting from the riddle. She sank into the dusty chair and began to read. The journals were a revelation, a voice from the grave that explained everything. Her grandmother had been a brilliant, formidable woman who had built her immense fortune not through inheritance, but through her own genius, turning a small investment into a multimillionario empire. But the entries were also filled with pain. They chronicled a lifelong battle against her own greedy relatives, led by a young and relentlessly cruel Eleanor. The journals detailed their constant attempts to swindle her, their lies, their manipulations, and a chilling account of their efforts to have her declared mentally incompetent to seize control of her vast portfolio of assets. She was reading her own story, written a generation before. She wasn't her grandmother's victim. She was her successor, chosen to fight the same war. Then she found the entry that changed everything. "And they see only the money," her grandmother wrote, "the net worth, the dividends, the raw capital. They are blind to true wealth. If this family line is to be redeemed, I must find an heir who possesses a different kind of strength, one who can see past the blinding glare of gold and dollars. This inheritance is not a gift. It is a crucible designed to burn away weakness and reveal character. It is a test and the key to my greatest treasure, a legacy worth more than all my stocks. Bonds and funds combined, lies with the silent songbird who does not sing. The riddle, the locket. It all clicked into place with breathtaking clarity. This wasn't a trap. It was an invitation. Her grandmother hadn't abandoned her. She had armed her. Tears streamed down her face, but they were not tears of fear or despair. They were tears of understanding, of connection, of a profound and terrible purpose. She was no longer just a girl from a foster home. She was the inheritor of a battle, and for the first time in her life, she was ready to fight. The fourth week began not with a sunrise, but with a declaration of war. She emerged from the secret study, the journals clutched to her chest like a shield, and found Eleanor in the grand foyer, arranging a bouquet of flowers in a vase with a serene smile. The sight of it, the casual domesticity of the act, was so grotesquely out of place with the psychological violence filling the house that it solidified her resolve. She walked down the staircase, her steps measured and silent. Eleanor looked up, her smile widening. "There you are, dear. I was just thinking we should have some people over. A small garden party, perhaps. Introduce you to the neighbors." The suggestion, so laced with threat, would have terrified her a day ago. Now, it was just noise. She met Eleanor's gaze, her own eyes clear and steady. "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I don't think so." The change in her demeanor was not lost on Eleanor. The frightened, malleable girl was gone, replaced by someone with a spine of steel. Eleanor's smile tightened at the corners. "You look tired. You should rest. All this stress over the inheritance is clearly taking its toll." It was another volley in the gaslighting campaign. But the words glanced off her newfound armor. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply walked past Eleanor and into the library, closing the heavy doors behind her, a clear dismissal. The battle for her sanity had shifted to a race for the truth. With the end of the month looming like a guillotine, she pored over the riddle and the journals, searching for a connection. The silent songbird who does not sing. It was an obsession, a mantra she repeated as she paced the vast rooms. Was it a statue, a painting, a piece of jewelry? She searched the house from top to bottom, her quest giving her a new energy. She was no longer a ghost haunting the halls, but a detective on a critical case. Eleanor watched this transformation with growing alarm. The protagonist's focused activity was a dangerous variable in her carefully calculated plan. A broken, weeping girl was easy to have declared incompetent. A determined, intelligent woman searching for something was a threat to the entire fortune. Eleanor knew she had to act decisively. Her final, most vicious move came 2 days later. The protagonist was in the library, comparing the handwriting in the journal to inscriptions in old books. When the doorbell chimed, she heard Eleanor's bright, welcoming voice, followed by the deeper tones of a man. A few minutes later, Eleanor appeared in the library doorway, a portly, silver-haired man beside her. "Darling, look who's here to see you. This is Dr. Alistair Finch, an old friend of the family. He was so concerned when I told him how you've been struggling to cope." Dr. Finch smiled, a practiced, professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just a friendly visit," he said smoothly. "Eleanor has told me what a difficult transition this has been." It was an ambush. Eleanor began her performance, recounting a litany of lies, her memory lapses, her paranoia, her violent reaction to the financial advisor. She painted a picture of a fragile, unstable girl crumbling under the weight of a great responsibility, a girl unfit to manage such a complex portfolio of assets. She then turned her attack directly on the protagonist. "Tell the doctor about your past, honey. Tell him about the Holmes. Tell him how you never really had a family to teach you how to handle things." The words were designed to shatter her, to provoke the very outburst they were describing. She felt the rage and humiliation rise in her chest, a hot, choking tide. She wanted to scream, to expose Eleanor for the monster she was. But she saw the glint of the phone in Eleanor's hand, discreetly recording everything. She looked at the doctor's impassive face and saw not a friend, but a hired gun, a professional witness brought in to certify her breakdown. All the fight seemed to drain out of her. Eleanor was going to win. She'd been a fool to think she could outmaneuver a creature so skilled in cruelty, just as despair threatened to consume her. She heard it again, the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. A beat-up old hatchback, splattered with mud, rattled to a stop behind the doctor's pristine luxury car. Eleanor's face contorted in confusion and anger. A moment later, there was a frantic, insistent pounding on the front door. Before Eleanor could stop her, she ran from the library and threw open the door. Standing on the steps, her face etched with worry and frustration, was her best friend, Sarah, the one person in the world who was her true family. A sister forged in the shared hardship of the foster care system. "I've been calling for weeks," Sarah burst out, her eyes scanning her friend's pale, haunted face. "Nor your texts made no sense. I knew something was wrong." Eleanor appeared behind her, her smile a venomous slash. "I'm afraid this isn't a good time," she said coldly. "We have a guest." But Sarah ignored her completely, her gaze locked on the protagonists. "What is going on here? Who are these people?" In that moment, seeing the fierce loyalty in her friend's eyes, the dam of her composure broke. A single tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek. "I need help," she whispered, the words a surrender and a prayer. Sarah stepped across the threshold, putting herself between her friend and Eleanor, her expression one of fierce protection. The war was no longer a solo campaign. An ally had just arrived on the battlefield. Dr. Finch, who had been observing the scene with a detached, clinical air, visibly stiffened. The situation had just escalated from a simple, well-paid consultation to a messy domestic dispute with a credible witness. His professional reputation was not worth getting entangled in a potential legal battle over an inheritance. He cleared his throat, a sound that was abnormally loud in the tense foyer. "Well, Eleanor," he said, adjusting his tie, "it seems your cousin is occupied. Perhaps another time would be better." He gave a curt nod, turned, and walked briskly out the door, not even waiting for a response. The click of the door shutting was like the sound of a gavel. Eleanor's final piece of evidence had just walked out on her. For a moment, Eleanor was frozen, her face a mask of incandescent rage. The carefully constructed facade had been demolished by the arrival of a girl in a beat-up hatchback. She turned, her eyes landing on the two friends, and the venom in her gaze was palpable. But before she could speak, Sarah, still standing protectively in front of the protagonist, took a step forward. "I think you should leave," Sarah said, her voice low and steady, devoid of fear. "You're not welcome here." The sheer audacity of the command, from someone who had no legal standing in the house, left Eleanor momentarily speechless. She scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound. "This is a family matter. You have no idea what you're talking about." "I know my friend," Sarah countered, her voice ringing with conviction. "And I know a predator when I see one." The confrontation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Eleanor, realizing she had lost control of the situation, finally broke the standoff. With a look that promised retribution, she turned on her heel and ascended the grand staircase, her retreat as regal and menacing as that of a cornered queen. The moment she was gone, the protagonist collapsed into Sarah's arms, the tension of the past weeks erupting in a flood of ragged, desperate sobs. Sarah held her tightly, stroking her hair and murmuring words of comfort, the familiar, grounding presence a balm on her frayed nerves. Later, huddled together in the vast, intimidating kitchen with mugs of hot tea, the whole story came pouring out. She told Sarah everything: the unbelievable inheritance, the month-long condition, Eleanor's deceptive arrival, and the slow, methodical campaign of psychological warfare. She showed her the hidden clause in the will, the document that turned a dream into a nightmare. Then, with trembling hands, she took out the locket and the journals. Sarah listened intently, her expression shifting from disbelief to anger to fierce determination. She read the journal entries detailing Eleanor's cruelty, her jaw tightening with every word. She looked at the riddle, her brow furrowed in concentration. Unlike Eleanor, unlike the doctor, she never once doubted her friend's sanity. She saw the truth for what it was: a monstrous plot to steal a colossal fortune. "We have to solve this," Sarah said, her voice firm, tapping the tiny piece of paper with the riddle. "The silent songbird who does not sing. Your grandmother left you a weapon. We just have to figure out how to use it." With renewed purpose, they returned to the library. The room now transformed from a place of dread into their strategic headquarters. The end of the month was only a few days away. It was a frantic race against time. They brainstormed, throwing out ideas. "A music box that's broken," Sarah suggested. "A painting of a bird with its beak closed." They searched the room, examining every object, every piece of art. Nothing fit. Exhausted, the protagonist sank into her grandmother's desk chair. The leather worn smooth by years of use, her eyes fell upon the endless rows of books. She was a reader, she mused aloud, a writer. The answer has to be in the words. Sarah's eyes lit up. A book about a bird that can't sing, or a title that means that. They began scanning the thousands of spines, their fingers tracing the gold-leaf titles. They pulled out books on ornithology, collections of poetry with bird-themed titles, and classic novels with avian characters. Hours passed. Dust motes danced in the fading afternoon light. Just as they were about to give up, Sarah pulled a slim, unassuming volume from a high shelf. It was bound in dark blue leather, with no markings on the spine. She opened it to the title page. "The Caged Lark's Lament," she read aloud. It seemed promising, but the book was just a collection of unremarkable poems. Disappointed, the protagonist was about to put it back when she noticed something. The space on the shelf where the book had been was not wood paneling like the rest. It was a slightly different color, a perfectly fitted piece of faux book spines. It was a false book, her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. Together they pulled on the false panel, With a soft, hydraulic hiss, a section of the bookshelf receded, revealing a small, hidden compartment. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, was not gold or jewels, but a single, thick envelope sealed with the same wax insignia as the letter that had started it all. At that exact moment, the sound of the front door opening and closing echoed through the silent house. They froze, expecting Eleanor, but the footsteps that approached the library were slow, measured, and familiar. The library doors opened, and the elderly lawyer stood on the threshold. His kind, weary eyes filled with a look of profound approval. "I believe," he said with a small, knowing smile, "you have found what you were looking for." The protagonist and Sarah stood frozen, the thick envelope feeling impossibly heavy in her hands. The lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, stepped fully into the library, his presence filling the dusty room with an aura of calm authority. He closed the doors gently behind him, shutting out the rest of the house, and, with it, the lingering shadow of Eleanor. His gaze was soft, but it held the weight of secrets finally brought to light. "I apologize for the theatrics," he began, his voice the same steady tone she remembered from his office and the life-saving phone call. "Your grandmother was a woman of particular methods. She believed that a person's true character is not revealed when they are given a gift, but when they must fight for it." He looked at the protagonist, a hint of pride in his weary eyes. "She constructed this entire scenario, this cruel test, not to break you, but to see if you had the same strength she did, the same resilience to withstand the vultures of this family." Sarah, ever the protector, found her voice first. You knew what that woman was doing to her this whole time?" There was an edge of accusation in her tone. Mr. Abernathy nodded slowly, his expression one of regret. "I was bound by my oath to your grandmother. I was to be an observer, a referee of sorts. My instructions were explicit. I could not intervene directly unless you proved you were worthy of the truth. The phone call was the absolute limit of what I was permitted to do. It was a nudge, nothing more. The rest you had to do on your own. You had to find the journals. You had to solve the riddle. You had to prove you could see beyond the immediate lure of the capital and recognize the danger hidden within it." He gestured towards the envelope. "Your grandmother's true inheritance is not the money, the stocks, or the portfolio of assets. It is the truth, and it is in that envelope." With trembling fingers, the protagonist broke the wax seal. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. Inside, there were 2 documents. The first was a thick sheaf of papers bound by a blue ribbon, a last will and testament. The second was a smaller, personal letter, her name written on the front in that same elegant script from the locket. She unfolded the letter first. "My dearest granddaughter," it began, "if you are reading this, it means you have succeeded where I feared you might fail. It means you are not like them. You have a strength they cannot comprehend because it is not born of greed. I'm sorry for the trial I have put you through, but I had to know. The fortune I built is a powerful tool, and in the wrong hands, it is a destructive weapon. Eleanor and her ilk have tried for decades to seize my assets, to strip me of my life's work. I could not bear the thought of my entire legacy, every dollar I ever earned, falling into the hands of those who would only use it to feed their own avarice." Tears welled in her eyes as she read on. The letter was a confession, an apology, and a declaration of love from a woman she had never met. It spoke of her own lonely childhood, her fierce determination to build a life of independence, and her profound regret at being kept from her daughter, the protagonist's mother, by the very family that now sought to rob her. "The first will was bait," the letter explained, "a legal fiction designed to draw the sharks into the water. The real will, the one that matters, is the one you now hold. It is my final move in a long and tiresome game of chess." She put the letter down, her hand shaking, and picked up the will. Mr. Abernathy stepped forward. "That is a legally binding holographic will, witnessed and notarized. It supersedes the previous document entirely. It was designed to be revealed only under these exact circumstances. She began to read, her voice a hushed whisper at first, then growing stronger with every word. It was a masterpiece of legal and personal retribution. To her beloved cousin Eleanor, the will bequeathed the sum of $100 to purchase a book on basic human decency, though I suspect even that small investment will yield no return. A similar pittance was left to every other grasping relative, each with a short, cutting remark on their character. Then came the final clause. The entirety of the estate, the house, the lands, the vast financial portfolio of stocks and bonds, the gold reserves, the funds held in international banks, every last cent of the multimillionario fortune was left unconditionally to her. There was no residency requirement, no mental fitness clause, no family council. It was all hers. The sheer scale of the wealth, the net worth described in the document, was staggering, a torrent of numbers and assets that made her head spin. But there was more. Tucked inside the will was another, thinner folder. She opened it to find meticulously organized evidence, copies of forged documents, transcripts of threatening voicemails, and a detailed accounting of Eleanor's past attempts to defraud her grandmother, including a scheme to have her declared incompetent. It was a complete dossier of her crimes, a weapon of immense power. Your grandmother was preparing for this day for over 20 years, Mr. Abernathy said softly. She documented everything. That folder contains enough evidence to not only ensure Eleanor never sees a penny of this inheritance, but to potentially trigger serious criminal investigations into her past business dealings. The weight of it all settled upon her. This wasn't just about money, it was about justice. It was about vindicating the legacy of a woman she was only now beginning to know. She looked up from the documents, her eyes meeting Sarah's, then the lawyer's. The fear that had been her constant companion for a month was gone, burned away in the crucible her grandmother had built. In its place was a cold, clear certainty. The frightened girl who had walked into this mansion was gone forever. A woman who understood the true meaning of wealth, power, and family was ready to claim her birthright. The final hearing was scheduled for the last day of the month, a formal proceeding to finalize the transfer of the vast inheritance. The setting was a cold, impersonal boardroom in Mr. Abernathy's downtown law firm, a stark contrast to the old-world grandeur of the estate. Eleanor arrived first, a vision of sophisticated mourning in a tailored black suit, her own lawyer trailing in her wake like a pilot fish. She was the picture of confidence, arranging her files on the polished mahogany table with a smug air of inevitable victory. She smiled a tight, pitying smile as the protagonist entered. Flanked by Sarah and Mr. Abernathy, Eleanor began, her voice dripping with false concern as she presented her case. She laid out her carefully fabricated evidence, edited audio clips of the protagonist's distress, a signed and likely perjured affidavit from Dr. Finch, alluding to significant emotional instability, and her own dramatic, tearful testimony about her cousin's paranoia and inability to grasp the complexities of managing such a colossal portfolio of assets. She spoke of the family's duty to protect the patrimony, to safeguard the wealth from the whims of a person clearly unfit to command it. It was a masterful performance, designed to paint the protagonist as a tragic, broken figure. When she finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Eleanor looked at the head of the law firm's board, her expression one of solemn duty. The protagonist, however, did not weep or rage. She simply sat, calm and composed, and waited for her turn. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat. "Thank you, Eleanor. A compelling work of fiction. Now for the facts." With a quiet dignity that filled the room, the protagonist stood. She didn't address Eleanor's lies. She didn't need to. Instead, she placed the thick, wax-sealed envelope on the table. "This," she announced, her voice clear and steady, "is my grandmother's true and final will." The shift in the room was seismic. Eleanor's lawyer went pale. Eleanor herself let out a short, sharp laugh of disbelief. "Don't be ridiculous. That's absurd." But her eyes darted nervously towards the document. Mr. Abernathy presented the will to the board, explaining its legal standing, its witnesses, its absolute power to supersede the document Eleanor had built her entire scheme upon. As the board members read, a low murmur of shock filled the boardroom. Eleanor's mask of sophistication began to crack, her composure fracturing under the weight of this unforeseen checkmate. But the protagonist wasn't finished. She then placed the second folder on the table, the dossier of Eleanor's crimes. "And this," she said, her gaze locking with Eleanor's, "is my grandmother's legacy of truth." Mr. Abernathy detailed the contents, the proof of embezzlement, the forged signatures, the documented campaign of harassment against an elderly woman. It was a complete and damning indictment. The inheritance was no longer the issue. Eleanor was now facing the very real possibility of criminal charges and public ruin. The mask did not just crack, it shattered into a million pieces. The elegant, charming matriarch vanished, replaced by a desperate, cornered animal. "Lies!" she shrieked, her voice raw and ugly. "It's all lies. She's a manipulative little nobody from the gutter who tricked you all." But the venom in her words was impotent. The board members looked at her with undisguised contempt. Her own lawyer slowly, deliberately, pushed his chair back from the table, distancing himself from his client's spectacular implosion. The battle was over. The victory was absolute. In the end, there was no grand celebration, just a quiet, profound sense of peace. The fortune was hers. An almost incomprehensible sum of money, a global portfolio of stocks, bonds, and real estate that made her a multi-millionario overnight. But as she stood on the porch of the great house a week later, with Sarah by her side, she understood the true inheritance. The money was a tool, nothing more. The real prize was the strength she had discovered within herself, the unbreakable bond of a chosen family, and the profound connection to the grandmother who had seen that strength in her all along. The estate was no longer a gilded cage, but a sanctuary. It was home. Looking out over the rolling hills, she told Sarah her plan. She would be the steward of this incredible wealth, but she would not be its prisoner. A significant portion of the capital would be used to create a new foundation, one dedicated to providing housing, education, and mentorship for children aging out of the foster care system. She would build the safety net she never had, turning her grandmother's legacy of fierce independence into a legacy of community and support. The cost of her victory had been a month of unimaginable torment, but the prize was a purpose that would echo for generations. She had fought the darkness and won, not just for herself, but for all the others who were still fighting to find their place in the world. What an incredible story of resilience and the true meaning of wealth. If this journey from hardship to hope inspired you, please show your support by giving this video a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel for more powerful stories. What part of her grandmother's plan did you find the most brilliant? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you.